The Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 1. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole cohort, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him. And they began saluting him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passer-by who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he could not save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. Now when the centurion, who stood facing him, saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's Son." The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God. Palm Sunday, the glorious entrance of a king. You may be surprised with the scripture reading today. We always do the traditional Palm Sunday reading on Palm Sunday from one gospel or another, and that's how it comes up in the lectionary, and this year is no different. In the lectionary, printed in my calendar, is Mark's version of it, with Jesus riding triumphantly into town on the colt of a donkey, with much fanfare, people waving their branches, singing hosannas to the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And meanwhile, there's this great website that I go to for commentaries called Working Preacher, and that also follows the lectionary. But for this Sunday, instead of the traditional Palm Sunday reading, they had the crucifixion reading from Mark that we just read. Now, while I like to follow the lectionary as it's printed in the disciples' calendar, I also appreciate some flexibility. And I felt more drawn to the crucifixion reading today. And maybe that's because I've worked on Jesus' glorious entry into Jerusalem so many times. Or maybe it's because it's saying more about where all this is going. In recent weeks, we've looked at readings from John highlighting Jesus being lifted up on the cross. In John 3, Jesus explained that he would be lifted up in a way that would save us. In John 12, Jesus explained that him being lifted up in this way would draw all people to himself. At that moment in John 12, Jesus was very popular. That passage from last week actually started with some Greeks who were in town asking for Jesus. Not only were Jews being drawn to Jesus, but so were the Greeks, so were the Gentiles in his popularity. In essence, all people, Jew and Gentile alike, were being drawn to him. Yet it was in that very moment that Jesus reminded us that it was not in the middle of an adoring crowd that he would draw all people to himself, but that in his being lifted up, he would draw all people to himself. So that begs the question, which Jesus are we drawn to? The popular Jesus or the hated Jesus? The Palm Sunday Jesus or the crucified Jesus? This being Palm Sunday, we're dealing with something like that moment from last week where people were being drawn to the popular Jesus, with people showing their great hopes in him being the one who would save them from Rome's oppression. Although Jesus' entrance into town was odd, riding the humble colt of a donkey with no military with him to speak of, and not really looking like a king like Caesar or even King David, he was still entering into town, though, with a lot of admirers, waving palms with this fanfare of a newly conquering king coming into town. It seems that his admirers were overlooking those extremely humble aspects of his entry, being so enamored by their idealized hopes of him being the one they wanted. Maybe since he was fulfilling that Zechariah passage that we read in the call to worship, because they were seeing proof that he was the one that they wanted. We know they wanted a king like King David. What they had was a king like Caesar. With Caesar, there was lots of good stuff, lots of prosperity, roads, aqueducts, imports from all over the Mediterranean, modern education and healthcare, stuff like that. However, also with Caesar, there was corruption, crucifixions, as far as the eye could see, a questionable version of their religious tradition, a huge disparity between the rich and the poor. They wanted a king like King David, who would conquer Rome, who would kick out Caesar, who would bring with him all that good stuff and cut out all the bad stuff. Is that the kind of king that we're looking for in this King Jesus riding into town. Now, obviously, if you're familiar at all with Holy Week, you already know where this is going. You already know what kind of king we're going to receive. As Holy Week rolls along, it becomes more and more apparent that Jesus isn't here to conquer the Roman Empire and send it packing. One of his closest friends betrays him. All those people who were drawn to him and his popularity turn against him. His religious leaders turn him over to Pontius Pilate to kill him, since they couldn't lawfully kill him themselves. Jew and Gentile alike, who adored him at the beginning of the week, despised him by the end of it. In essence, the whole world went from admiring him to lynching him. In these moments of trial, Jesus, the great King, celebrated so much before, was all alone. As the rest of his closest friends scattered and hid to save their own lives in the middle of this revolution gone wrong, the king they got was not the king they wanted. This being Women's Month, and anyway, it would probably be good for us to note those who did stick with him. You got it, the women. 3 women in particular, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and Salome, as well as some other women not mentioned by name, a group of women. Maybe they really understood what they were getting in Jesus, but then again, they didn't seem to expect his resurrection 3 days later. So maybe they were just more fearless than the men in their compassion, in their grief, in their loyalty as things got ugly. Now, I imagine it was the latter, as they refused to abandon Jesus in his time of suffering, concerned more about him than for themselves. Which brings us back to the question, which Jesus are we drawn to? As an American, I really can't speak from everybody's perspective. I see things from the view of a Christian born and raised in America, having lived in places like Oklahoma and Indiana, Florida, Kentucky, Michigan. From personal experiences and from stuff on TV, I have seen so much parading about how Christian we are as a nation. And that is a whole topic that I'm not really going to get into. It just makes me wonder, if we are so Christian as a nation, then why don't we want someone like Jesus to lead us? Now that's a rhetorical question. I already have my own answer. Because we want someone who will be tough on crime, who will fix the education and the healthcare systems, who will stop illegal immigration, who will force tyrants to stand down, who will squash terrorism, who will fix the economy, who will fix this virus situation, who will bring us prosperity. Am I wrong? You tell me. I've just never seen anything to convince me that as Americans, Jesus is anything near the kind of king that we want. We just like to throw his name into stuff. The kingship we find in Jesus is as Isaiah spoke of it hundreds of years before Jesus. Obeying God to the point of offering his back to the floggers, his cheeks to those who would tear out his hair, not hiding his face from insult and spit, yet feeling no disgrace, inviting others to join him in his humble, abused stance, refusing to stand down no matter how brutal his opponent turned out to be. I mean, and it's not just Americans. Who wants a king like that? Nobody wants a king like that. That's understandable. It's understandable that we don't want a king like that. That's not how politics works and all this and that. But it's also scary. Because if we don't want a king like that, then we're very prone to become his opponents, his oppressors, his abusers, the corrupted religion handing him over to Pontius Pilate, the indifferent superpower that's not fazed by putting him to death. You know, in the golden age of Christianity in our nation, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever you want to say. You know, when everything was so great, everybody went to church. Church buildings were busting at the seams and all that. You know how many people were lynched during those years, and specifically between the years of 1882 and 1968? 4,743 people were lynched. That's 3,446 black people, along with 1,297 white people. And just like how Roman soldiers cast lots over who would take Jesus' clothes, people in those lynching crowds were known to fight over their victims' possessions and more, getting so graphic that I won't say it here. The question I'm asking is a big one. It's at the heart of who we're supposed to be as Christians. It's a defining factor in who we Christians then turn out to be. Are we drawn to our idealized version of Jesus the King, very popular, being cheered on by the crowd, thinking of him as our king who will conquer Caesar? Or are we drawn to Jesus the King as he actually is? The kind of king who freely offers love and healing and forgiveness to his own hurt. The kind of king who insists on washing our feet and going to the cross to serve us to his dying breath. When we say, "Hail the King of the Jews," are we saying that sincerely? Or are we mocking him, given what he turned out to be? As we hail King Jesus this Palm Sunday, I pray that we are sincere, like those women who were with him at the cross, loyal to a fault. And in turn, may we become more and more like those women and like our King himself on the cross, putting the world before ourselves.